In this video, I'm going to show you how to condition your metapixel to bring in qualified buyers into your funnel. Whether you're running a VSL funnel, a webinar funnel, lead magnet funnel, any other kind of funnel. By the end of this video, you'll know how to tell Meta to bring you higher quality leads and not people with lower intent. This should help you increase your lead quality, increase your show up rates as well. And if you're using a call funnel, then your call rates as well. And overall bring down your acquisition costs in conjunction with everything else you're doing further down the funnel. So let's get into it here. All right, so as you can see, we've got, so recently we ran a webinar funnel for a client a few weeks ago, right? A few weeks ago, we spent $2,783. As you can see here, the revenue was $15,783. So that's a 5.7x return on a single webinar run. And now look, the webinar wasn't anything exotic, right? It wasn't a massive audience. He didn't have a really big organic presence. It was not a low ticket offer with like high volume. It was just a ad campaign to a paid webinar that then pitched a sales call at the end of it to enroll into a high ticket options investing coaching program, which was $3K. That was the offer. But the reason that the numbers ended up looking like this, as you can see, we got like a 5.7x ROAS is, and by the way, like, and I'll show you the stats at the end too, but the reason that the whole room showed up, basically 95% of the buyers showed up to the webinar, and then a third of the room ended up booking a call. And the reason half of those calls who showed up closed wasn't just because of the creative, right? It wasn't because of the targeting. We did not have a killer sales team, right? My client takes the calls himself. He is not a sales guy at all. So it wasn't any of that stuff, right? The reason that it worked was the conversion event that we were optimizing in our meta campaigns. Now, of course, there's other important things further down the funnel. As I mentioned, his webinar is really good at nurturing his leads, but it all starts at the very top. And that's what this video is about. I'm going to show you exactly what pixel conditioning is and why it matters more than most people realize. And let's keep going here. But I'll show you how to set it up correctly for whatever type of funnel you're running. So again, whether it's a VSL, a webinar, a lead magnet, I'll show you what we mean by higher intent. So you start bringing in and attracting higher quality leads from the very top of your funnel instead of trying to turn them into high quality somewhere along the middle of your sales process. So here's what we're going to cover today. So step one, how Meta's pixel actually learns. So whether you're using Pixel or Meta's conversion API, which is I would recommend, I'll show you why the conversion event that you choose, it trains the algorithm to find that specific type of person. So the event that you're using for your campaigns is actually really important. Step two, I'll show you why optimizing for leads alone might be killing your lead quality and why most people never catch it. Then for step three, I'll show you how to set up purchase event optimization across different funnel types, again, as I mentioned, including which event you should be using and when to fire that type of event. And then step four, I'll walk you through the real data. I ran a split test for that webinar campaign. I did a leads optimized campaign and I did a purchase optimized campaign. And I'm going to break down the numbers of what each of those brought in and how that broke down in terms of which was better than the other. And so by the end of all this, you'll know exactly what to change and you'll know what numbers you have so you can justify running the better optimized campaign. Again, it's all about testing, right? That's what we always say. If you got something that's working, great. But if you always want to test and improve, this is a really good way to try it. So, all right. Here is essentially how it all works. A lot of coaches running like a webinar or a VSL funnel, you launch your ads, you have leads coming in. The cost per lead might look somewhat like $10, $12, $15. And you might feel good about it. You're like, hey, that's a great cost per lead. You got volume coming in, it feels good. But then when you run the webinar, you might find that not that many people show up. Or if you're running a VSL funnel, you might find that you got a lot of ghosted people on the calls, right? So you have this top of the funnel that's looking good, but then by the time those leads actually come into the lower part of the funnel, whether it's time to show up for the webinar or to show up for their call, they're either ghosting you or they're complete tire kickers. And then you're spending time, or you or your closers are spending time on shitty leads. People don't show up. It takes up time in the calendar for other more serious leads, right? So that's the problem with having bad lead quality and low intent people coming into your funnel. So what most people do is they'll test new creatives, they'll test the targeting, tweak the funnel, the follow-up sequences, and like all these little things throughout your funnel that might not necessarily be broken, and they don't necessarily help you fix shitty leads at the very top. And as I mentioned before, there's the leads you bring in are influenced by your messaging, obviously your creatives, your copy, but really importantly too is what signals you're giving Meta on a job well done, essentially, for whenever they bring you a lead. And we don't just want to tell Meta a good job every time they do something. We want to tell Meta a good job whenever it's someone that we actually see as a qualified or a high intent lead. So what essentially happens when you run a lead campaign, as you can see here, is let's say you're running a lead optimized campaign. So you have people fill out a form to opt in, right? A lead optimized campaign. And then when they fill out that form, your pixel or your KPI, your Meta CAPI, conversions API, I'm going to call it CAPI from now on, conversions API, which is like the pixel but more accurate, will then tell Meta, hey, good job, we had someone fill out the form, go find more people like this. And the problem with that is that Meta will then go out and find more people like that who are likely to fill out a form. And that's it. That's the signal you gave it. So not buyers, or not people who are willing to fill out maybe like on a VSL, like an application, which is more friction, a lot more questions, right? So lower intent. And it's not people that are perhaps ready to spend money, they don't have their cards out, people who show up to things. It's just people who clicked and filled out a form. And Meta is very good at its job. So it will find you an enormous amount of leads or people at a cheap cost that will go do that. The problem is that it is filling out a form and not willing to buy, right? It's willing to fill out a form, not willing to buy. And those are two very different behavioral profiles. So the more you run that campaign, the more that Meta over time is going to reinforce that wrong pattern. And that's usually why oftentimes you'll see people's campaigns will start to like peter off, right? Start strong and then they start to go down. And that's because you're constantly reinforcing not positively like the right type of leads coming in. So anyone, as long as they're willing to fill out a form, is essentially fair game for Meta. So that's where you're conditioning the algorithm to bring you the wrong type of leads this week, next week, and the one after. And that's the part that most people running ads never examine. They look at the cost per lead and think, great, this is so cheap. Or if it starts rising, that's the first thing that they get panicked on, and assume that the copy, the creative, the ads themselves are the problem. But it's actually not. It's the signal that you're giving Meta and the way that you're training the algorithm or conditioning your pixel, which is influencing all of these things later down the road. So, okay, this is basically, as I mentioned, how it works, right? You have your ad, someone converts, they fill out their form, Meta logs it and finds more people like them, and you get more of that specific profile that you're running. Here is the problem with optimizing for the wrong condition, right? So let's say on the left here, we have optimizing for a lead, right? So every time the event fires, whether it's a registration, a page view, or purchase, Meta will record who that is, right? So in the case of a lead optimized campaign, you're telling Meta to go find form fillers, as I mentioned, right? Which is low commitment registrations. And so that might result in poor show rate, low intent, and weak calls, especially if you don't have a good follow-up nurturing system for those leads coming in. Then we have the purchase optimization side here on the right, where you're optimizing for the purchase. So instead of telling Meta, hey, good job, whenever someone fills out the form, you're only telling Meta good job when they then do the next step, which is to buy. In the case of the paid webinar that I was mentioning, when they buy the ticket for the webinar, that's when I tell Meta, hey, our conversion event was met, good job, find me more people like this, right? And if you're running a VSL funnel, it wouldn't be, hey, someone filled out the application, good job, go find more people like that. You would probably want to do that on the schedule, right? So you're running for people who are willing to schedule the call, not people willing to opt in or fill out an application. And that will result in higher commitment registrations or call bookings or whatever it is that you're running in your funnel. And that'll in turn lead to a higher show rate, a stronger intent of a profile, and probably a higher closing rate in the end. And over time, you're conditioning your pixel to keep bringing you that quality of a lead. So let's talk about how you can actually implement this across your different funnels. So if I just zoom out here a little bit. All right. So first funnel I mentioned, let's say that you run a free webinar. You're like, Juan, I like a free webinar. I don't want to put too much friction right now. No problem. So if you're running a free webinar, Here's how I would do it. Offer an upsell. So once they can register for free. That's your lead event or your complete registration. You can then present them with an upsell, okay? When you present them with that upsell, it can be something ideally that doesn't take too much of your time, but you want it to be valuable enough to your ICP that it will, or your ideal avatar, your ideal customer, right? That they will actually be wanting to go for it if they're the right fit. And then when they buy that upsell, that's where you would then trigger the purchase when they buy that upsell. So you can have two campaigns running, one that just gets you people to the webinar for leads, and you can split test with another version of that campaign that's optimizing for purchases of the upsell, right? And then over time, the one that's doing the upsell optimization is going to be bringing you in better leads than the one that's just doing free registrations. If you're doing a paid webinar, if you're doing like a two-step, then opt-in first is your complete registration. And then when they buy their ticket to the webinar on the second page, that would trigger your purchase. If you're doing a straight one page, like add to the page and they have to buy right then and there, then that would be your only conversion event, really, like just purchasing the event, the ticket for the webinar. Lead magnet, similar thing. Like if you have a free resource, when they download that resource, you should be pitching them something on the back end, right? Like not just like, hey, we sent you the PDF or whatever to your email and like, good job. It should be like, redirect them to your next thing, whether you have a VSL or a webinar coming up or some other thing that you want them to take action on. That should be the next part of the funnel, right? And then when they take that action, then you trigger the event. So whether that was a website schedule for a call, or if they purchase something on the back end of that free lead magnet, that's where you then trigger that event. And again, you're going to be optimizing for better quality leads. And for a book a call, as I mentioned, it's the exact same thing. So don't optimize for people filling out a form, optimize for people scheduling the call. And ideally, people who schedule the call should only be people who filled out the form correctly so that you don't have low quality leads scheduling the call and triggering that event. All right, so let's continue here. There's another element too that's retargeting, which you should absolutely be doing. And you can do retargeting at different stages of the funnel. So for retargeting, you're essentially telling Meta, hey, anyone who took a certain action, I want to retarget them and show them some more stuff to get them to take the next action, right? So retargeting, you can do it like very top of funnel. So for example, if someone clicked the ad and viewed your landing page, but they didn't opt in or take any action, you can still retarget those people because they took that. You can now isolate them through the meta pixel, essentially. I won't go into that here in this video, just be way too long. But you can essentially say, hey, Meta, go find the people who clicked on the ad and show them these other sets of videos, or I want to keep hammering them, right? And then same thing for people who register and maybe didn't buy. So if like they opted in for a paid webinar and didn't buy, you can now retarget them and get them to like buy the ticket for the webinar, right? And then similarly, those who bought their ticket, we now want them to show up. Or if you have a VSL call, people who book a call, we want them to show up. So you would run retargeting to that specific segment, and that the messaging in that retargeting is different, right? Because it has to be aligned with where they're at. So if they paid for their webinar ticket, your retargeting would now be more around like they should show up, why they should show up, reminders, nurturing, right? Content. Like there's a mix of retargeting styles that you'll want to implement to increase the likelihood of that lead showing up to whatever it is that you want, whether it's a call or a webinar. It'll essentially warm them up for you, stay top of mind. It'll keep showing up in their feed. And retargeting, you can actually do it it's pretty cheap. It's not that expensive, even if you're running at a higher volume. So it's much cheaper than running like your daily ad spend. You can retarget for 10 to 20 bucks easily a day and continually show up for the leads in your funnel, right? So that is retargeting. And so if you wanted to split test, if you're currently running like a low intent conversion event and you wanted to test for a higher intent, this is how you could do it. So for example, for this paid webinar, they were running a leads campaign before we started working with our client, right? So leads campaign, and that would just lead to the opt-in page. And then from there, once they opted in, it would go to the purchase. So what we did was, instead of just having leads go to opt-in and that's it, and if they opt in and they don't buy, that was pretty much it. We built retargeting. So basically we built a campaign that is only looking at people who registered or who looked at the event but didn't actually buy a ticket, right? So if they either looked at the opt-in page and didn't opt in, or if they registered but didn't buy, we started retargeting them to send them back to the purchase page for the webinar, right, to get their ticket. And with this one, because you know where they're at, you can kind of call them out in the ad. You can be a little bit more direct in some of them because you can essentially, you know where they're at. So you can say, hey, I saw you registered, but you didn't complete X action. So that was the retargeting, and it'll catch people who didn't quite take the action, but did something. And what we then did was we added a purchase campaign to run alongside it, where it's primarily just focused on getting, it didn't care if people filled out the form to opt in. It only cared about people actually purchasing the webinar ticket. And so that's how you can run these two. And again, if people opted in, because on the purchase campaign, we still ran them through the two-step opt-in. So if they still opted in and didn't purchase, then we still had their data and that action to then go ahead and retarget them. So the retargeting was catching people from both of the campaigns, which is the beauty about retargeting. But I'll show you the breakdown of like uniquely the lead campaign and uniquely the purchase campaigns, how those broke down. But that's essentially how you could do it, right? So if you're running a VSL funnel and maybe you're running applications submitted, then you start running, instead of a purchase, you start running a schedule submitted. Now, depending on your sales cycle, if you can usually close someone within enough time of when they opt in, you might actually be wanting to even optimize for like purchase of your high ticket thing, right? If you can close someone within a few days of them opting in, then you have attribution, depending on what your attribution is on Meta ads. But if it's within the time period that Meta will credit it to the ads, then you could technically also optimize for an even higher intent, like a purchase. But now we're getting a little more higher friction, and I'll talk about that, the consequences of that, or the trade-offs in a second. So yeah, that's the retargeting. There's an additional layer that you can also bring in to the fold, which will help you increase your lead quality even further. And that's to only fire the pixel when the lead is qualified based on the response. So if you have a form and you're like, hey, people to opt in is just name, email, or name, email, and phone number, and that's it, you don't really have an idea if that was a good lead or not, right? But if you add just one multiple choice question, like for example, if I'm running ads and I'm saying, hey, are you a coach making more than 15K a month? Yes or no? And if they say no, I wouldn't have my pixel fire off, because then that's not a lead that's financially qualified to work with us, right? So in your case, if you have one or two, ideally the less friction, the better, but just unless you're having really bad quality leads, then you want to increase that friction, right? But just from a basic perspective, if you can just ask one multiple choice question that can help you gauge whether this is an actually good lead or not really a good fit at all, you can have your pixel only fire for that specific event. So it's not necessarily like, should I just stop using leads optimized campaigns? You can still use leads optimized campaigns. And this is how you can just increase that lead quality by adding just one more question to the form that they have to fill out that will help you gauge whether they're a good fit or not, right? So again, in my case, hey, are you making more than 15K a month? Are you a coach making more than 15K a month? Yes, no. They say yes, great, the pixel fires, and it'll tell Meta, great job. If they say no, then my pixel will not fire and Meta won't have a clue, and so it won't go find more people like that. So what this means is that we're continually optimizing for higher quality, higher intent people when you combine the two, the event optimization and when you do selective firing of the pixel based on whether they qualify or not, if they responded correctly to the qualification question, right? These two together will help you really increase the lead quality coming in through your funnel and the lead quality that your pixel will then be trained on and find you more and more of over time. So one thing worth noting before we move on is that when you're sending Meta, oh yeah, that's the comparison, so we won't jump into that yet. But I was just saying, when you're sending Meta a more precise signal, like you move on to purchase events or you move on to schedule events, or you start restricting the flow, right? Like if out of 5 people who complete the event and only a few were qualified, let's say that you're used to optimize for leads, you're getting 100 leads, and now you start optimizing for purchases, and there's only like, out of those 100, only 5 purchase, you're naturally giving Meta less data, right? So it's going to take you longer to exit that learning phase because you're going to need that much more ad spend to reach the same amount of conversions and continue training your pixel, right? Same thing with the selective firing of the pixel. If out of every 100 leads, you're only firing back 50 that are actually qualified, then the same thing happens, right? You're giving Meta less data So you might have a higher cost per conversion, and it might take you longer to exit that learning phase. But that's the trade-off between going for quality over quantity, right? You're training the pixel on a smaller data set, a smaller group of people, and instead of flooding it with cheap signals, you're going to be flooding it with higher intent, higher quality leads. And that's going to really compound over time, especially once you continue to spend over time, right? And the key here is that you don't panic and you don't go, hey, I used to get leads for 15 bucks a lead, and now I'm getting purchases for like 35, right? Because at the end of the day, that purchase is still going to be someone that has a higher intent, even if they cost the same. The person who ended up buying that thing signaled a higher buying intent than someone who just did it for free. So if you want to do it, just keep that in mind and be willing to take the hit initially. It'll be worth it in the end. Just don't pull the plug early until you have enough data to make an informed decision on whether this worked or not for you. So I mentioned we had a case study that I wanted to run you through for this webinar we ran recently. And here's the basic breakdown of how it came down. So on the top, you see the lead optimized campaign, and on the bottom, you see the purchase optimized campaign. Now, a few things to note here is the client contacted us on a pretty short timeline, and the campaign for leads was already running. So essentially, we kind of came in here last second, and for the last week and a half before the webinar, had to kind of massage this into a way better performing campaign structure. Now, I always like to test with what's currently working, right? I don't like to just gut everything. So we kept the leads campaign running. Obviously, we made some updates and more testing to creatives, copy, etc. But because it was running earlier, it had more ad spend. It had a longer runtime because our client wasn't running a purchase campaign. So the ad spend for the leads campaign is higher than the purchase because of that reason. It was just on for longer time. But yeah, so here's what the data showed. So the lead campaign, 1,854 in ad spend. It produced 22 ticket buyers. Tickets were like 22 bucks. The cost per buyer was 84 bucks and 27 cents. Whereas the purchase campaign was 831 bucks, got you 17 buyers, and that came at a cost of $48.88, and it was going down, right? Like as we continue to run this, that cost was going down because even the purchase campaign originally started at like 100 bucks and 80 bucks. It started going down very fast. So over time, the more you do this, the better. But that's the compounding effect I was talking about. So that's a huge difference, right? It's nearly like it was 42% cheaper per buyer when we ran the purchase optimized campaign than the lead optimized campaign, and it did it with half the ad spend. So when you think about what this means at scale, if you're spending 5K a month or more, and you shift your budget towards purchase optimize or schedule optimize or just a higher intent, you're not just gonna be saving money per buyer or per qualified lead, but you're gonna be getting a different behavior profile, so a higher quality. And it's gonna be people who paid to be there or who went through a little bit more friction and showed a higher intent to be there. And it's not just because they click something to get a free access to something and they totally forget about it because they don't really care and they're not invested. So by the way, if you wanted to look at like the full funnel breakdown, I know I told you guys I'd show you that as well. Here's what that came down to. So for that webinar we ran, $2,783 in ad spend. That got us 36 buyers of tickets for the webinar. Again, that was 22 bucks roughly. Out of those 36 people, 34 showed up to the webinar. So almost all of them, that's like a 94% show up rate to the webinar. And then out of the ones who showed, 10 booked the call, right? So almost a third of the room booked the call. Only one person no showed to their call. So that's like 90% show up rate. And here's the beauty of all this coming together. Out of the people who showed up for their call, out of the 9 people who showed up, 9 out of 9 were qualified. So 100% of them were qualified and were invited to join the offer. And out of those 9, 5 took the offer. So 55.5% close rate. And all that basically means that revenue was $15,783 on $2,783 of ad spend at a return on ad spend or ROAS of 5.7x. We didn't change the funnel. We didn't change the offer. The webinar stayed the same. I do want to say that here, follow-up was really important. So we had follow-up sequences, right? Like email, SMS for people who opted in but didn't buy. So that's important. And also the webinar was very good at warming people up, right? But that's the power when you have the whole system coming together, is how you really get more juice out of that lemon, right? So that's also why pixel conditioning matters, because it's not a campaign setting that you just tweak and forget. It's literally a strategic decision that's going to bring you better quality leads over time. And of course, you have the rest of the funnel that happens, that has to, each part of the funnel has to do its job. But when you're feeding it better leads from the start with higher intent, everything else is going to work that much better. So I do want to, always be transparent and just kind of self-reflective on what we need to improve on, what we're working on next. So if you're curious about that, that's what I'm going to cover right now. So 5.7x ROAS is a great result. I'm not gonna say it's not. Now this is a relatively low ad spend. So as we scale this thing up, that ROAS is going to go down. And these numbers, although it's profitable, there's still a few things that I want to work on. For example, the cost to get a buyer of the $22 ticket is currently $48.88. I would like to keep bringing that down, right? If we can liquidate ad spend on the webinar, meaning if all of the buyers of the tickets can cover the cost of that ad spend. So if I'm charging $22 a ticket in this case, if I essentially have enough buyers to cover all of the ad spend, and I'm basically the client's pitching the webinar for free with no cost out of pocket, that would be something that we're looking to work towards. But if you're not there, as you can see here, you can still be profitable even if you're not liquidating ad spend, which is something that a lot of people sometimes go a little too hard on, and just, it's okay. You'll still be profitable. So, but that is something, cost per buyer for the ticket to the webinar. We want to bring that down. And the cost per book call is $278. This is a B2C, so business to consumer coaching program. So for that kind of coaching program, I think it's still on the high end. So there's definitely room to bring that down. Cost per qualified show is $309. Not bad. Again, wanting to bring that down because it is a B2C offer. But all this is this way as it is right now because our client also just prefers a very high friction funnel. He takes the sales calls himself, and he's not a big sales guy. So I just want to jump on calls with people who are very warm, very nurtured. I don't want to waste my time with people who don't know essentially what we do and aren't ready to buy. So that's the current setup. That's the importance of also just having a really good nurture system, right? Bringing it all together. But those are the three things that we really want to work on. Of course, there's a lot of other stuff like on the ads that we're continually testing and bringing in better creatives that are outperforming the ones that were running before. But high level, like things that really truly matter here, these are three metrics that we for sure want to improve. Of course, there's CAC. The CAC's looking pretty good though, cost to acquire customer. So yeah, that is where we're at with this. These are the levers that we're pulling. And the other thing I wanted to say is like these micro optimizations are important, but like more important than just shaving $20 off the cost per call and liquidating your ad spend and whatever is like, in this case, we got a 5.7x ROAS. If we have a funnel that's basically, you have like so many other things that you can improve, like the sequences and the reminders and the setter follow up and like X, Y, and Z. In this case, we don't even have a setter follow up, and it's still working. So all of this is to say, if you have a proven model that's working for you and is profitable, whether it's 5 or even 4 or 3, you can of course do these micro adjustments to get more out of that funnel. But 5% here, $20 cost reduction there isn't going to drive as much revenue for you as just scaling your ad spend, right? In this case, I told my client, like the next thing is, yes, we can optimize a few things, but let's just put more money in because it's working, right? It is working. We just need to get more people in front of this offer into this funnel to then jump on a call and close and enter the program. So that's the biggest thing. Of course, as you scale ad spend, as I mentioned, 5.7x right now, that ROAS is going to go down. But we can't maintain a 5.7x ROAS at like a 10x the ad spend that we have right now, right? But a 3 to 4x ROAS on like 30,000 in ad spend is still way more profitable than a 5.7x ROAS on $2,800 ad spend, right? So the math is simple. Stop trying to extract so much out of like the little things in the system. Once you have something that's working for you and is profitable enough, just scale that bad boy, get more people in there, and you can fix the leaks along the way as well. But don't let that hold you back from scaling your campaign. So that's what we're doing with this client, continuing to condition that pixel. The funnel is proven, and we just want to keep scaling that positive signal of buyers only. Once we get some more costs down, we might introduce a little bit more selective firing of the pixel. So like only people who answer certain things, right? To continue dialing in that avatar in the pixel. But otherwise, that's it for this video. If you're running ads to a webinar, a VSL, or any other kind of funnel, you're optimizing for leads, but not using conditional firing of the pixel, or maybe you're not optimizing for higher intent events when you could be, like purchases or schedules, then you're essentially training Meta to get you form fillers, low intent buyers. And that decision could be costing you on every metric further down in your funnel. So that's one thing I hope this video helps you understand, and you can go ahead, try it out, see if you get a better result. I showed you how to split test it here. And if you have any questions on how you can apply this to your business, any questions about the video, anything that we covered here, just drop it in the comments and I'll be happy to answer you. Hope you got value out of this, and following me on Instagram, I'll have the link below in the description. I'll catch you in the next video.